On today's show, we're going to be talking about proving the value of your design system. Is there a magic number that will make you seem like the Mark Zuckerberg of design systems? Is that even a good thing? Or is it a fool's errand to try and prove out such an ephemeral concept as design systems to the powers that be? I'm Luke Murphy, and I'm joined by my co host, Michelle Chin. We're both design advocates at zeroheight, the design system management platform, and this is Design Systems WTF. Ah, intro done. Uh, I feel like we've talked about proving value quite a lot on this, but I think this is a nice, nice topic to always dive deeper on, right?
Yeah, I for sure. Because I think this definitely comes up, and I feel like we always have to prove the value of a design system, like,
It's
every
never
time,
a,
which
yeah, it's
I mean,
never
I
a
don't
done thing.
there's lots of other things that get built that didn't need to be proved. So
Yeah.
it's kind of annoying.
Are we proving out V1 of the design, or the MVP of the design system, or the concept of the design system as something that maybe needs continual funding and resource? Um, yeah, I suppose to start it off, what does value even mean, Michelle?
I think in the general sense, it's like people can do their jobs better. That's like, I don't know, the
Oh, that's an
basic
easy thing to
essence.
prove then. Done. Just 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 have everybody in the team say this makes my life better, and then endless funding.
Yeah, except that doesn't really nobody cares about Yeah, I don't know, like, what does value even mean from your perspective?
I suppose for me, I, it always comes down to business value, unfortunately. Um, and I do think that it's one of the reasons that we struggle so much with proving out the value of design systems, because when it's a design system tool, when it's an internal tool that is helping the people internally, like the internal people are your users, it's an internal product. Um, that is always going to be hard. It's so far removed from the kinds of metrics that you will always have as a company, right? That you're trying to achieve as a company, especially if you're a um like commercial company. Um it's really interesting. So without sidetracking ourselves already, I was having I was having a chat with Amy Hoop, who we were just talking about before, yesterday about this, because she was lamenting the fact that she's never really had the experience since leaving Gov UK, which, for those who don't know, Gov UK, so Government Digital Services in the UK, built out this whole website and system called Gov UK, which is basically, it's seen as one of like the gold standard design systems in the world, I think. But it is used by so many different departments, and it is very thorough and very well built, and it's seen as like one of the sort of shining lights of design systems. What is one of the key differences between that and any other place that she's worked since? All of the places that she's worked since are commercial entities. Whereas the government, they kind of have an onus to do something that is good for not only the people, the civil servants that work there, but then also, the end users as well. And it's not down to like commercial value all the time, unless you're at a conservative rule forever, which we have been. But
Yeah, I mean, I think of it in a government aspect, there's a certain level of, um, value in terms of trust. Like,
mm,
so
yeah,
if you go to, like, US government websites, like, you'll want to follow a design system to show that this is a legit site, and they have a banner at the top of, like, "How do you know this is a legit government site?" But also I think the government wants to make sure they're not excessively spending money or wasting time, so a design
yeah.
system provides that value.
I mean, you're just trying to play devil's advocate against me now. Well, I suppose what I'm saying is that I think it's easier for some types of entities to prove out the reason to have a design system and to continue funding a design system than
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, I think that's the thing is, like, it's like a non-issue during in a government capacity, unlike
yeah. I mean,
a
yeah.
private capacity, right? Like,
Although I'm
where
sure that there's probably lots of people in civil service who would disagree with this, but yeah.
yeah, in
um,
theory, I guess.
but yeah, so I suppose, but this actually kind of gets to the crux of it. What is value? Value is whatever is perceived as value by the person who has the ultimate sign off. Like that is when it comes down to it, the only thing that really matters. Like it is whoever has that,
Yes.
whether it's like a group, a team, or an individual person, whatever they perceive as value, that's the only thing that you should be like measuring against.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in previous episodes where if the stakeholder, whatever they're being accountable for, like, for example, shipping 15 features in a quarter, you can pitch to them, "Hey, the design system will allow you to do that." And they'll be like, "Okay." Well, maybe not that easily, but in theory, like relating the design system to their goals and what they need to be successful, um, is is what really will resonate with them. Even more so than numbers, I think.
It's yeah, it is really. I think that's true. Although I think that there are definitely some leaders out there where numbers are the be all and end all, right?
Yeah.
It's like if it's not contributing to the bottom line dollars, then it doesn't really matter. And that's where you have to kind of get creative with your maths when it comes to internal tooling. Um,
Yeah,
it
I
is.
guess, like
Sorry, yeah, go on.
go ahead. Well, how much math would you do? 'Cause I feel like I've seen talks where people calculate the time takes to build a component and, I don't know, other, like, real serious equations. So, yeah, I'm curious to hear, like, how much math is really needed to provide the value.
I I have a hunch, right? And this is an educated hunch from many years of being in positions where people have been asking me for numbers. People care about the numbers, and people really seem to care about like when you're setting whatever the goals are for those numbers. And we'll like dive a little bit. Um, Nobody ever dives too much. And I think that it's one of the things that like people can get into. I definitely have got into the trap of this, especially in my days as a PM, like of over engineering when something isn't like a clear cut number that we have a dashboard for. Over engineering ways of measuring things. Um, I actually think that using simple measurements, especially if they're like leading measurements, they're things that you can easily affect and see change in. Um, so things like how many people I don't know how many people are looking at the documentation like that could be one that might mean something if what you're trying to achieve and what people I kind of don't see that as something that probably most senior stakeholders would care about. um but if it is something like measuring speed, like increase in speed of release, which I think it's a whole nother topic for an episode of whether design systems actually do make teams go faster, but we'll shelve that for a second. um if it is speed, all you need to do is find a way to measure that in a like way. So whether that's like story points, if you're doing like sprints, so how many story points you can do, how many I don't know how many screens you can create, how many like interfaces you can create in a period of time. Benchmark it, make some changes, measure it again. Like, that is literally the only way you can measure anything and see if you're having any impact is benchmark, measure against benchmark. And I think that the way that you measure that doesn't necessarily matter, or you'll find out if it matters or not, whether you're like moving those numbers. But I do think that like telling the story around those numbers is actually more important than the numbers themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's that story element, not necessarily like the number crunching.
Yeah.
And I think the idea, like, so another way you can kind of get lagging metrics of looking at how many bug tickets were submitted that were UX UI related or accessibility related or what have you, localization related. Do that as a benchmark and then see if once the design system is in play, it's a longer term thing to see if there is a reduction in tickets being submitted, which is always helpful. But that can take some time, unfortunately.
And I do think that a lot of qual measures are actually pretty powerful there. Like, especially if you're looking at I don't know, getting like important voices in the business to give good quotes about the design system and basically, act as those champions. Like that can actually go a lot further than, some numbers on a page as well. Um, when you're trying to like prove out the value. One of the, I don't know, a long serving engineer who is, looked up to as one of the best engineers saying, hey, this has significantly improved my work and made me quicker and made the work that I do more consistent over the last 6 months, could be enough. Like, it could be. It might not be, but it could be. And I
Yeah.
always like to, I don't know, I'm a big fan of like erring on the side of less work is good. But I do think, I don't know, I do think that a lot of people get like wrapped up in a lot of like vanity or what I would see is kind of like health metrics as well. Um, Things like I'm not devaluing. I mean, we're currently, if anybody's interested, we're currently working on some features that you can sign up for the beta to, um, that are around like measuring the like developer impact of your design system. So it's basically measuring like how much packages, components within packages are used. It's there are similar tools out there at the moment. But anyway, just talking around in circles
Yeah,
here.
I mean, I think it's like the quantitative stuff is cool. I think it's like you have to think about how you're using them. A lot of times people will be like, "Oh, we'll just look at the Figma analytics." But it's like what story are you telling out of that data? You know, because I think the other thing is like you can get some false positives. So if someone keeps detaching components, that could be a red flag. But also if they're supposed to detach the component, that is fine, right? So um really thinking about how you're using some of those data points is really important.
It's the same as like analytics. Like, so like if you look at things like doc site analytics, it's really great for like defining your roadmap and um making sure that like people are actually paying attention to what you're doing, and like all of those things are really good internal metrics to use. I don't actually think that a lot of them are particularly great for um or at least as like headline stats for like proving out value. Um, I do think that like proving out value of your design system is actually less of a metrics thing and more of a relationship building thing. But
Yeah,
hey, that's
totally.
just my opinion.
I mean, I think it's a important opinion to have and shout about because I think so many people are like, we need to be data driven. What are the measurements? How do I measure data? And it doesn't always have to
Nathan
be
Curtis.
quantitative data. Um, but yeah, I don't know. And I think like Aliska brings up a good point, like impact on mental health for developers and designers. It's important, and I think, Dan Mall and I talked about this in a webinar about attrition, right? Like, if you have maybe, like, having a design system reduces attrition, um, and figuring out how to better tie in that story, because attrition is expensive. Because not only do you have a gap in resources, then you have to spend more money to, um, find another person, onboard them, all that stuff, so
What would be your one thing to like if you could just like write up one thing on a sheet of paper and take it to a leader and be like, hey, this is gonna make you, I don't know, it's gonna help me double my team.
I mean, I think it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
Um, but I think what I would put on that paper is the uh, solution to their biggest pain points. So I'd be like, "Hey, what's keeping you up at night?" And then finding a way to say design systems will help you sleep better.
I think just yeah, design systems will help you sleep better. Just write that sentence and then we're done, right? Um
Oh yeah, maybe that's what I'll put on. Thanks.
but it is interesting because I do think like it's I think part of this as well is looking at other teams and seeing how they sell in their value to the org as well. Like, because I think as I said, it is quite hard when we're talking about internal tooling because you are a little bit more removed from what is seen as like essential. Um, but yeah, it's I don't know. Is there anything that other teams do that kind of help them?
Yeah, I'd be curious if anyone listening has any thoughts or feedback. But it's interesting in the How We Documents survey, I had asked like how um, easy it was for people to get buy-in from different types of stakeholders. And I guess if you're ever worried that it's just going to be really difficult, it turns out that it's not. People, well, I guess it seems pretty obvious. Like in a design org, design leaders will definitely see the value of your design system, and it's pretty easy to get buy-in from them. Engineering departments and leadership, it was also people found it easy getting um, buy-in from them as well. More removed leadership, it might have been a little bit harder just because they're a little bit more distant from the actual day to day of the product, but it didn't seem impossible. I mean, sure, it was impossible for some people, but for the majority, it wasn't impossible.
That's interesting. And I think that's the thing. I think that would be um my big recommendation for like trying to get trying to prove out the value of your design system is actually just building that relationship with whoever your like most senior report is to who has that um I hate the phrase, but seat at the table. Whoever is in those decisions, especially when it's decisions around like resourcing teams, especially if people who would make those decisions around budget cuts, around like um, layoffs, things like that. Um, like have a sustained effort at building good relationships with that person and having them understand your work and see the value in your work, like trying to get to the bottom of what their language is for like what good value is, because that can be you know integral. I think it's like one of the things that I've seen design system teams die way too easily when they kind of like see themselves as this ivory tower that sits above everybody else and sits separate from everybody else. And they don't share their work. They see the value in their work as creating components and putting things out. Whereas it's like actually the shouting about your work is like one of the most important things. Building relationships with other people in the business is one of the most important things to make your work visible, which kind of sucks, but it is kind of necessary.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing is like when you get into design systems, and if you're just a designer or just a developer who wants to just do the design and code,
Yeah,
um, you're in for a real surprise. There's a lot more, I guess, soft skills needed to really help promote and get that value and buy-in for your design system.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I'm curious if anybody listening along, and Paul, you can edit out this bit. If you've got any questions, I forgot to say at the beginning that we do questions towards the end of the podcast, but you can chuck your questions in the chat and we'll get to those. Um, it's interesting here that oh, scrap that. Alishka just made a very good point that it feels like politics and it feels like you're running a campaign. You 100% are. I had this naive belief that I could go into startups because within startups you don't have politics. If you're in senior leadership, you're entire, or if you're in any kind of like leadership, whether it's like a team leadership, squad leadership, whatever it is, if you're like running something, most of your job is politics. Stakeholder management is politics. It is influence. It is persuasion. It is like getting people onto your side. And I think it's like one of these things where it's like, I wish that it wasn't. And it's not for everybody either. But I do think that like it's one of the things that we've kind of overlooked in a lot of design system teams because we just see it as like, let's run a lean team with the doers. Um, You need somebody who's running politics.
Yeah, yeah. Like we take a very practical approach to creating design systems and saying people should use it but there's a lot of emotions involved.
Yeah.
I was talking to a program manager at who was embedded in a design system team and they took ownership on the shouting about the design system and getting people to use it because they didn't mind talking and they didn't mind engaging with other teams. So I think that's also a good way to have someone do that if you're not interested at all.
I think it's usually it's relying on whoever the best person is with words in your team. So I think that like product program managers are really good shouts for that. Because a good product manager should be part product marketer. Like that is, what a good product manager should be. Um, Similarly, content designers as well. If you're lucky enough to have content designers on your team, a lot of them are usually pretty good at shouting about the design system. In fact, it's the path from content designer to design system lead is like pretty way more common than I would have ever thought. So Amy Huber is a great example of this. Like, has started as content designer and now is design system lead. But I've known others as well. And again, I think a large part of that is because they're very good at talking about things. They're very good at communicating. Um,
Yeah, and
and
I
then
think like thinking about who is receiving that communication, right? And tailoring that communication to that group or individual.
100%. Oh, yes. I think I might have shared this on a previous episode, but I'll see if I can find it and chuck it in the show notes. Um, Having a communications plan for your design system team, it's like something that literally takes about 10 minutes to create. And it's basically around like who your major stakeholders are, where they hang out, what language they like to be talked in, and like what they value most. And it's just like a really nice, like crib sheet for the team to know how to talk to relevant people. And I think it's, if anything, just do that for whoever the people are who control your fate in the palm of their hands. Do that for them at least, for your own sake, because nobody likes that awful email where you get told that all your resources are being pulled away and there's going to be one person on the design system team now. Um,
Which happens sadly.
yeah. So let's run over by a few minutes if that's okay. We've got one last minute question. It's kind of a question, which is Sean here. Main challenge for us is trying to make the same point again and again, but in creative and fresh ways, and dealing with waning interest or buy-in, especially when it feels like things aren't progressing as fast as they think it could. Common common problem. Um, I'm curious, how would you tackle a problem like that?
Yeah, I've seen this a couple of times and have experienced this a couple of times, right? Like I think when you're new and starting off a design system at your org, like you're really excited and it's gonna be like go 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 and it's gonna be amazing, and then you realize it takes a really long fucking time, and then you're like, well, shit, like I've promised this and now it's not, or it's taking longer and people are grumpy. So I think the thing is like, you know, under promise and over deliver. So say like, hey, design systems take a long time. This quarter we're going to work on this, but here's a very like broad roadmap of where we'd like to be in a year or two. Um, so then you're not saying like you're not promising all the things. So I think people just don't understand how long things actually take. The people who you're convincing and the people doing the creating. But yeah, like I think that's what I would go with. What would you go with?
It's interesting because I suppose it depends on the situation. If you have that situation where you are like, because I do think one of the things is like embrace having goals, whatever they are, because I think it gives you a reason to like shout about what you're doing. If you're a goalless department, it's a really easy department for people to like forget about and not care about. So I think having like, publicly facing goals in terms of like into the rest of the company. Um, if you're in that situation, because this I've heard this happen before, where it's like you're just a really good team, and so things seem to on the outside look boring because you're doing your job and you're smashing your goals and you're doing all that. Start setting some stretch goals for the team if you think that you have some capacity to do it. I do think that like I do think that if you're doing the right things and you're consistently like delivering, and but like what you're doing is not particularly exciting, it's not a bad thing. I don't think that I think that is actually a really good thing. And I do understand that like feeling of getting worried because it's like you're not, you're not the new shiny thing anymore that anybody cares about. So you feel like your neck might be on the line. If your neck is on the line, I think it goes back to what I was saying before around the one of the ways to make people care about it is probably to like focus a little bit on like gathering some feedback and surfacing that like qualitative data, because I do think that like warm and fuzzies can make people realize how valued or like how appreciated a team's work is. So just make sure that you've actually got that cadence of like collecting that feedback, or actively like reach out to people who do use it and be like, hey, um, we need to show that people actually give a shit about this. Can you maybe write us a little like, little warm and fuzzy post that we can use as like a point that we can like share about how how much people like and value these things. Um, I don't know. It kind of goes down to the fact that it's like an analogy. If I pick up a book, right, and it's like 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, but it has a couple of really good quotes from authors that I know and respect on the cover, I will 100% pick that book up and read it. In fact, I won't even check what it's rated on Goodreads if it has those qualitative statements on it. Like that is, and I do think that like there is a real strength to like social proof is like a thing. It's a thing that people use. Testimonials. It's a thing that people use. So I think like lean into that if you're not already.
Yeah,
I
I
think
really like that.
I think we are over time now, so we should probably try and wrap it up. Thank you everybody for joining today. It's been a blast. We've got some good topics coming up. I have no idea what next week's one is, so that's why I'm stalling for
Well, it's
time
not
now.
next week. It's 2
Ah,
weeks from now.
2 weeks.
It will be how should we version design systems?
Oh yeah, I've got opinions.
Should we version
Yes.
design systems?
Yes, but not in the way that we currently do. Anyway, so should we version design systems to the next episode? That's in 2 weeks' time. If you want to get in touch with us, please do so. So you can get in touch on the Zero's Slack channel, which is our own little private Slack community, which you can sign up to at zeroheight.com/Slack. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, X, at zeroheight, or on Instagram at zeroheightHQ. Or if you're old fashioned, you can also email us at community@zeroheight.com. We also accept carrier pigeon. Um, until next time,
I really don't
bye.
like pigeons. That's like a big
Oh,
fear of mine. So I
no,
don't accept carrier pigeons.
no carrier pigeons then. Okay, see you in 2 weeks.